3. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, programmers from all over the world, welcome to the Daily Code, episode 13. I'm Assert Chris, and here we just learn about code. So let's do that. A couple of days ago, I spent a bit of time with Aerys, which is the PHP framework for asynchronous code, and in particular, it gives us the ability to do WebSockets with PHP. That's pretty exciting. It was a bit of a frustrating stream because I didn't really know what I was doing. Spoke to the Aerys chaps, and they did a few changes, and there are now more examples, so I'm going to try again. I'm literally going to try again. Let's do that. Now, I think it might be useful, because we did this quite a few days ago, just to go over the code that we wrote for ReactJS. Also, be sure to let me know if the audio levels are fine, because I've adjusted them to make them a bit louder so that you can hear a bit more music. Just let me know in chat if the music is soft enough or if I should be louder, etc. So, on Monday, what I did was I created some React components. React's a JavaScript presentation library, and you can make things by mixing a curious amount of HTML-looking stuff inside JavaScript components. It's very good for componentizing stuff so that you include the template and you include CSS and you include eventing stuff inside just a self-contained JavaScript component. So, let me show you where we got to. Okay, I'll start up a server on port 3000, and I'll go into examples. So what we were using as an example is maybe doing a CMS and having page management, because all CMSs manage pages, right? So, well, many of them that I know of. So we've got this list of pages in our CMS, and we can click edit on any one of these and update their value. We get a little asterisk when the value changes. Anyway, we can click cancel to go back to that list. We can also delete things from this list. So this is kind of like a list of tabular data that you may expect to see in a CMS, but it's all done client-side. We've got different components to manage this. So right at the top level, we have a page admin, and that gets some data from a backend and renders out some page objects. And each page object can either be an editor for that page's data, or it can be a view. So that list item that you see, it can be a view. The editor has some form components on it, so it's got a title input, it's got a body input, and that cancel button we saw. So when you change these, the input changes and the list item changes. And then the list view is basically just a rendering of this on screen with the edit and the delete buttons. Now the backend component that we did for this is very simple, right? It's got an array of page objects, which are very simple. I'm sure you'll agree. We have temporary stores for update operations and delete operations. And when we get all items, we're not actually deleting items from that initial list, we're just filtering them out. And we're not actually updating items in that initial list, we're just mapping changes over them. So this is kind of an inefficient, but a pretty quick prototype for us to have set up to be able to power this React frontend. Now, I did this initially because I wanted to get into using Aerys and WebSockets to power this backend, and I'm totally keen on doing that. So I thought we could try and do that again. This episode. I did have this config file that I set up initially, and to show you just how serious I am about a do-over, I'm going to hit delete on this file. We'll do it over, it'll be fine, we won't struggle as much as I did before. Okay, so the library I'm talking about here is github.com/amphp/Aerys, A-E-R-Y-S. And since last I worked with this, it's been updated, so I'm going to do a composer update. That should pull in a newer version with some changes, addressing problems that I had in the last stream. And then we're also going to set up a configuration file, but I'm not going to copy this exactly because I did that last time and it was still a little bit messy, a little bit more than what I needed. So instead, I'm just going to make a new file, enclose examples and source, and all of these files. I'll make a new file and I'll call it server.php. Okay. Now because this is a PHP thing that we're going to be using, we should probably require the composer autoloader. So vendor autoload.php. Okay, then we need to import a bunch of stuff because most of these live within the Aerys namespace. In fact, do we really need to? Maybe let's not import them for now. Let's not import them for now. What we can do is use function router. Okay, oh, I don't even need to do that function call. Okay, because, well, Aerys. In fact, do we need to do that? We don't even need to do that. I want to make this really clean, right? Router is Aerys router. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then on this router, we can add some routes. We can say router, router get, and the root route will have this callback function. Okay. Now we get a response, we get a request and a response object in here. These we need to alias as well, so I'll just say Aerys response and Aerys request. That's fine. In fact, I'm a fan of expanding these. So to send a response to a browser for a normal HTTP request, we use response end, and we can just give some HTML here. I'm not even going to do HTML, I'm just going to say hello world. Okay, let's test this out. Now how do we get this going? Yes, okay, Onlyo, am I pronouncing that right? What we're doing is we are looking at the ReactJS frontend that I created on Monday, which is a list of pages in a CMS-like thing. Looks like this. You can go here and you can edit pages and it will update them in the list, okay? We're taking this, which has a very static backend that just has hard-coded pages in, and we're moving this backend to being controlled through Aerys, which is a PHP library that, amongst other things, enables WebSockets. So we're going to move the logic to generate these pages, to edit them, to delete them. We're going to move that to the server side. And we're going to do that communication through WebSockets so that the ReactJS front-end components just communicate through WebSockets. They don't actually store any data locally, which sounds exciting, right? Now, a couple days ago I was having a bit of frustration because I couldn't figure out how Aerys worked, but I've had a lot of help since then, and we're busy along that process of making this work. Now, we're not doing, if you remember a week ago I was working a lot with Icicle code, and all the time when I did something with Icicle I needed to reference the event loop, and I needed to listen to server ports and stuff. Well, we still need to do the listening to server ports. If you look further down here, we have this bit of code here. So what does this do? Host is new host. Then on the host, we expose the host at this port for any server name, which means any requests that come into the server at this port, they get picked up by the script. Okay, I'll make this port 8000 because I don't like, I don't like what it was before. Okay, and then we'll make it use the router. I won't worry about the other things. It's going to give an error, right? Because I have nothing other than a base route, but that's fine. In fact, maybe I can even chain these because it looks a bit better. And I wonder if I go 127001, I kind of like that better. This is very neat. Okay, but how does this get run? We're not using an event loop here, even though Aerys is event loop based. So, how do we know what's going on? Well, we don't run this script directly. We actually run a file that's in vendor vendor bin Aerys. It's exposed through the Aerys through the AMPHP Aerys package, and it's like a runtime that includes all the logic for that event loop stuff. But we pass this as a configuration file. It looks kind of like this. Hold on, let me just check which PHP version I have here. PHP-V. Okay, I need a brew unlink PHP 5.5, brew link PHP 7.0. Okay. Apparently unlink and relink. I've got all these versions of PHP locally installed, which is why I have to do this. I technically only have to do this for Aerys and AMPHP because they require PHP 7. That's fine. It's not a lot of work to do. Okay, what did that actually do? PHP-P. Okay, PHP 7 or RC5. That should be fine. That should be fine. Okay. Now, I learned a few things the last time I was working with Aerys. The first is that we invoke it by saying PHP bin, vendor bin Aerys. Ah, okay, cool. Thank you. I will do that. Let me know if that's too soft or too loud. Oh, but just a little bit. Let me know what that volume's like. Metanat. It's pretty cool to have the music during the thing though, right? I mean, I think it's not as quiet as stark. Okay. PHP vendor bin Aerys. Now this is the Aerys runtime that we're going to be using. And firstly, we need to do -d to put this in debug mode. So when we run this, it's going to tell us which config it's loading. It's loading one from within the vendor folder because we haven't told it to use our special config. And that one in the vendor folder listens on port 1337. But that's not what we want. We want a custom config file. So we'll do -d for debug mode again, -c for config file, and then we'll point this at server.php. Okay. Now we have a syntax error. Class host is not found. Ah, I know what that is. We just need to prefix it with this class name. Okay, there we go. So now it's loading server.php as the config file. Okay. This is cool. This is cool. I like this kind of feedback because now we can tailor it, right? Okay. So now we're using the right config file, it's listening at the right place. Let's see what this looks like when we go to that in our browser. Hello world. That's really cool. That's really cool, hey? This is going a lot better than last time. Okay, we have our default route. We send a response with response.end, but this isn't WebSockets, right? We want WebSockets, we totally do. Okay, so to do that, we're going to have to create a class. I'll create it further up here. I don't want to put it in a separate file because I want to keep this example as simple and as easy as possible. So let's say class backend, because remember it's the JavaScript ReactJS backend I'm moving into the server side. Backend implements Aerys WebSocket. Okay, now that's an interface, obviously, because I'm using implements, which means I've got to do a lot of sub-methods. Whoa-wee. I'm just going to delete their comments for now. We can always go to the class definition, or the interface definition to find that again. But I want to make some space here, because it's all in one file. Kind of messy. Whoop. I'll get there in the end. Let's delete this. Let's delete this. Okay, so we got a bunch of methods here. I'm actually going to remove these. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I also need to switch this to PHP 7 language level because it's not configured for that at the moment. Okay. Right, so we have this thing, this interface that we need to implement. And essentially, this is what's going to get given the requests that the WebSocket makes. So the messages it sends, the connections it makes. And so, I mean, if we read the methods, we can see that makes perfect sense. On start, except a WebSocket endpoint, we don't really want to deal with on start or on handshake at the moment because I want to go for a kind of a simple approach tonight. But on open, well, this is when a new WebSocket's opened. It's already handshaked. It's already done and dusted, right? This is an upgraded WebSocket request connection. Okay, so this is where we want to do something. Maybe something like notify other clients that a new WebSocket connection's made. Maybe just send a message back to the client saying, thanks for successfully connecting, or you are now on whatever. Then we have an onData endpoint. This will get called when a WebSocket connection sends a message to the server. So here we'll have access to the message stuff, and we can send messages elsewhere, we can interact. This is a hook into our PHP backend. On close, this is for when a connection is shutting down. Sweet, Phoebus. Also, there's going to be archives, so you can check the archives as well. You know, just come back and check later. Good night, man. Thanks for being here. We're also not going to use onStop. Anyway, we've got our basic HTTP routing. I'm going to restart the server just to make sure that there aren't any syntax errors and refresh the page for the same reason. Seems fine. Okay, so how do we get a WebSocket connection? Well, we have to create an instance of this backend. Backend is new backend. And then we have to create a route for the WebSocket that we want people to be able to connect to. So we'll say router get, and we'll give this an explicit endpoint, WebSocket, okay? Now we don't give a call back to this. You see, Aerys has this concept of callables or bootables, runnables, things that are able to accept requests or be handled by a router. Of course, some of that terminology was a bit out. So the one option that we have when we create these routes is to just give a callback, and that'll get the request and the response, and we can act in here. Alternatively, we can implement some other interfaces, but we don't want to do that by hand now. We just want like a really simple way to get a WebSocket interface. So there's a function we can use called Aerys WebSocket, and we can pass it an instance of this class that we've made that implements the WebSocket interface. So we can say backend. Now behind the scenes, this is wrapping that instance of class in a bootable, and the routes accept a bootable as the second parameter, and they will set that functionality up automatically, which is pretty rad. We don't have to worry about that. We just say this, and then we should be able to connect to the WebSocket here. So let's give that a go. We do need to restart the server though, because we've added some more code. Control-C. Okay, refresh this. Right, now we still have our normal HTTP server. If we go to /ws, upgrade required, because that's actually a WebSocket endpoint now. So we can say var socket is new WebSocket, and we'll use the WS protocol 127.0.0.1.8,000 WS, because that's our endpoint. WebSocket's not defined. Web, capital S, socket. Okay. Now, this has made a successful connection because we haven't seen an error, and we can actually emit messages on this. We can say something like socket send foo, and that'll send a message. We don't get the error message we previously got, which said something like socket is enclosed or error state, or whatever that error message said. So this is actually sending a message to the WebSocket. Do we have some debugging info on this? Well, we have a request. We know that the request was made. That seems pretty cool. That seems pretty cool. But how do we use this? How do we do something interesting with this? Well, back in our class, we have these methods onOpen, onData, and onClose. I think for now, all I'm going to use is this onData method. What do we do with that? Well, we have the message data. We can say something like yield message. Let's see what this gives us. Well, no, for now I'm just going to say yield message, because message is a value that is going to be resolved, right? Extends body, and this is a promise stream. So we can yield this. And that will make sure that all the data will be pulled from that stream and put into that message variable. I think message just gets replaced with a string value. Let's test this out. We have access to this thing called an endpoint. It's the implementation of this HTTP request upgrading. And on this, we can call the send method. We can call it with a client ID. So we can say something like, we can echo back to the same client ID, or we can use null to echo to every client ID. For now, I'll just send it back to this same client ID, and we can send that message value, MSG. Okay, but before we can see what this is doing, of course we need to restart the server again, which means we'll need to make a new connection. But now, before we can see that message that gets returned to us in the echo, we'll have to add an event listener. Standard JavaScript. This is on data. On data, on message. JavaScript WebSocket. I need to just refresh my memory. Who can keep this all in their brain? So much stuff. Okay. WebSocket on message. Okay. Which means the event is probably not data, but message. Function message. I'm hoping that works. Socket send foo. Nope, that didn't work. Let's go back here and change this to data. Surely, on message is the thing. Add event listener. Maybe I want to say, maybe let's do this rather. Socket on message is function message. Body is yield message. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. Okay, we don't need to wrap this in brackets because it's PHP 7 as far as I know. So we can do that. Let's restart this. Ah, I should have checked console because I could have seen all those errors. Okay, make a new socket connection, add that event listener, and then socket send foo. Yes? No. Still have an error. What am I doing wrong? Send on null. That's interesting. Okay, let's go back in here. In fact, well, let's go into vendor. Because I'm getting send on null, which means this endpoint. No, I didn't! Okay, cool. Gee, it's great that you're here. Okay, private endpoint. This endpoint is endpoint. Thanks for the tips. This is awesome. Okay, here we go. Let's restart this and try again. Oops. Okay. New WebSocket, add event listener, send. Then we get the message event back. Really cool. So message event.data will give us that message. It's just what gets returned from that send, right? The send just gets that event on the WebSocket, so client side, with this as the data parameter. So this is cool. We can do an echo server. This is like half our work done. I'm just going to replace this with a longer variable name. Great. Okay. So to recap, because that might have gone quite fast, when we start this connection, we're given an endpoint, right? So we can store that in a private variable, and that's what we emit messages back to. So when it comes time to receiving data, we'll have to yield to the message because it's a stream, and at the point that we yield, because of how PHP generators work, the function stops until that value is resolved by AMPHP. The value we get back is assigned to body, and then that initial variable that we got on start, we send to that with the ID of the client we want to send the message to, or null to send to everyone, and the string we want to send as a message. This is a way to communicate between the server and the client through a persistent connection. That's pretty rad. Okay, right now I want to just do a quick debug again because I really enjoy doing this. So AD C, was that it? Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to benchmark this again. What happened there? Keep alive. Maybe the concurrency is too high. Just do 100. Okay, I'll just do 100 concurrency. So we're keeping the connection alive. We're saying do 100 requests at a time for 60 seconds and return us some stats. Let's see what the benchmarking is like. This is just going against the root route, the initial / URL that returns hello world. That's quite high performing though. I mean, compared to how I'd set up that Icicle server a week ago, I think I can really improve on the performance of the Icicle server. But this is pretty cool. So it's handling 1,400 requests a second, and it's also still open for business for this socket connection, which is pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Okay, so what do we want to do now? We have this backend that we want to move over through to the WebSockets. So at the moment, this is just a JavaScript class, and it's got a static array. Yeah, that's another cool point. It's just one working debug mode. I think it performs quite well, actually. It performs really well. So we have this backend in JavaScript that is just a static list of pages, and we want to move this through to the WebSocket so that the ReactJS frontend can get the data from the WebSocket. So how do we do that? Well, maybe we need to decide on a little bit of a, I guess you could say, a message standard that we want to send. For instance, we can't just send raw data back and forth with no structure to it, because how are we going to know how that must be interpreted on the client side, or how the server is going to interpret that? I think for now I want to use the same kind of behavior I have here. So the kind of behavior that says have a static list of pages, and instead of deleting from that static list or updating that static list, just return a filter of the data and map the changes over. It's essentially the same logic that's here, but it's on the server side, so we can share this across multiple clients, which is pretty exciting. Before I do that though, I actually want to take a little bit of a break. So I'm going to go for about 2 or 3 minutes, listen to some music. I'll be